Merry Christmas, everyone. It's great to see you all here tonight. I want to thank you personally for taking a break away from your families and holiday celebrations. Perhaps that's a good thing for an evening of Masonic education. This episode marks our 23rd education in the series entitled 21st Century Conversations on Freemasonry. And this is the 43rd virtual education since we started this virtual series in 2020. For those of you who are returning visitors to our education, thank you for coming back. And I do see some new names on here tonight, so I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining us and being with us here tonight during the holidays. A special heartfelt thanks goes out, of course, to Lexington Lodge No. 1, Ware Lodge of Research, and the Rubicon Masonic Society for your constant support of our virtual Masonic education. The brothers within these institutions are the backbone to what we do every month here for Freemasonry. Worship Brother Tom Nitsky, is he on with us right now? It doesn't look like it. So Worship Brother Dan Kimball, would you please do the honor, sir, of delivering an opening devotion?
Good evening, brothers. Our opening devotion is taken from the ritual arranged by Scots Freemason Andrew Somerville McBride, known as the McBride Ritual. Please assume an attitude of prayer, brothers. May the great architect of the universe enlighten and bless us. May our labors, thus begun in order, be conducted in harmony, closed in peace, and rewarded with progress and success. Amen. So mote it be.
So mote it be.
So mote it be.
Thank you, Dan. Brothers, as you know, the purpose of this virtual Masonic education is to assist in the improvement of ourselves by establishing a deeper understanding of Freemasonry, of its beautiful traditions and practices, and further cementing the brotherhood of our fraternity for the betterment of mankind. Any opinions expressed during this virtual education will be those of the presenter or the participant, and they do not necessarily reflect any views of any lodge or Grand Lodge or the Rubicon Masonic Society. By participating with us, you consent to our guidelines, and our full disclaimer can be found at rubiconmasonicsociety.com/disclaimer. As you know, these are not tiled meetings. Masons and non-Masons are more than welcome to attend and participate. Please, gentlemanly manners at all times. No alcohol, no smoking or foul language to be permitted. No discussion of politics or religion. Attendees may be removed if not following protocol. And finally, some recommendations to best assure that this meeting is as enjoyable as possible for everyone. If you're able to do so, please recommended attire is coat and tie for each meeting. Please type your name and any appropriate Masonic title and location under your video to identify yourself to others. If you're not a Mason, please simply type guest after your name. Please enable your video camera so we can see you. Please reduce background noise, turn off all other programs, and please be patient, of course, should any technical difficulties occur. Brethren and friends, tonight your presenter is yours truly. And it's slightly awkward for me to be speaking this entire time, so I appreciate your patience with that, and I'm not going to pass the mic over for any introduction because, of course, no introduction should be needed. And I say that with jest. I do appreciate you very much for being with us here tonight, especially on the holidays, the day after Christmas. And it's a great pleasure to be with you this evening. I'm going to deliver a presentation on a topic that has always been very important to me for as long as I can remember. This is a topic that fits very nicely with our reason for joining Freemasonry in the first place, and it should be one that we attempt to live, and even more so live in our daily lives, especially during this beautiful holiday season. This presentation transpired after receiving a book to read from a very good friend and brother, Worshipful Brother Dan Kimball, who delivered our opening devotion at a Rubicon Masonic Society dinner a few months back. Worshipful Brother Kimball handed me a very small book, and if you can see my screen here, this is the size of this book. Handed me a very small book, not much larger than the cell phone in your pocket. And he asked me if I would read it and write a book review on it for the Ware Lodge of Research website. For those of you that don't know, the Ware Lodge of Research, it shares a new book review every month. And as of this presentation, they have garnered over 47 consecutive book reviews from brothers worldwide every month since February 2019. All these book reviews can be found on their website, and I encourage you all to go and visit. Ware Lodge of Research.com. And if you have an interest in writing a book review, I'm sure your submission would be happily received by Worshipful Brother Kimball and shared with the other Masonic education resources on that website. For anyone that knows Worshipful Brother Kimball personally, you'd likely agree that he is one of the few brothers whom it is seemingly impossible to say no to when he asks anything of you. It's almost as if Worshipful Brother Kimball has this extraordinary power where people are unable to turn down any offer he presents. And perhaps many of you can relate to this statement, especially if Worshipful Brother Dan asked you to donate any money to Rubicon for our documentary or any other sponsorship activities. In all seriousness, though, Dan has been instrumental in helping to raise funds for this nonprofit journey that Rubicon has undertaken, and we're extremely grateful for his efforts in that. So, of course, when Worshipful Brother Dan asked me for my book review, I couldn't say no. I happily obliged. Very glad I did, because there are very few books less than 100 pages that can make such a profound impact on the reader on so many levels. This book is The Ethics of Freemasonry, and this presentation is built around this book. The book, The Ethics of Freemasonry, is by Brother Dudley Wright, and it consists of only 88 pages. It's slightly larger, like I said, than the average smartphone. The book's title, when I first found it, or when Dan first handed it to me, rather, caught my attention, and it reminded me of a college course that I took named Business Ethics. And that course was for a full semester. It had dozens of assignments and tests, but the core lesson of the course can be summarized in one simple statement. And that statement was, there's no such thing as business ethics, there's just ethics. However, the lessons of that course were in the implementation of that ethics, understanding what ethics is, how to be ethical, which is much easier said than done, even if one commits consistent time and energy to studying and trying to understand it, as we all should be doing throughout our individual and collective Masonic journeys. So before diving into this book, I found myself wondering if a similar statement could be made for Freemasonry. Is there no such thing as ethics of Freemasonry, just ethics? And that is what we will be dissecting and discussing here today. And this presentation will be part presentation and part discussion. So I would hope that when some questions are raised, that a few of you who are comfortable speaking would be more than happy to jump up and answer some of these questions to engage in this discussion, because I think it would be best if we can talk about this topic versus presenting alone on this topic. So the book, The Ethics of Freemasonry, was published in 1924 by Brother Dudley Wright, and he wastes no time helping Masons better understand the answers to the question, why are we Freemasons in the first place? This question may seem obvious to many Masons, as we often hear responses such as, I want to be a better person. I want to be a better husband, a better father. But do we as Masons really know how to do these things? And perhaps the better question is, are we honestly implementing the lessons of Freemasonry in our daily lives as we obligate ourselves to do so? And I would challenge most Masons' affirmative responses to that question, including myself. Because if we're being completely honest with ourselves, we know that the implementation of ethics is much more difficult than the attempted belief and understanding of it. Wright goes on to make many great statements about the relationship between ethics and Freemasonry. And before we combine the two in a discussion, we need to take a step back and further understand the word ethics as a whole. Ethics comes from the Greek word ethos, which means character. The term ethics was first used by the ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle to refer to the study of moral principles and value. And Aristotle has a great book about ethics I encourage you all to get and read. Aristotle believed that ethics was a crucial aspect of human life, as it helped individuals to live in accordance with their values and their principles, and to behave in a manner that was consistent with the values of their community. The word ethics is a central point of study in, of course, philosophy, psychology, and other fields that deal with real-life questions about moral conduct and values, such as business classes as well. According to the dictionary, ethics is defined as a guiding philosophy of moral principles that govern an individual or group's behavior or conduct of an activity. It is founded on standards of right and wrong that prescribe what humans ought to do usually regarding rights, obligations, benefits to society, fairness, or specific virtues. Put more simply, brothers, ethics is a direct reflection of ourselves, of our character. And our character is made up of our mental and moral qualities, which directly impact our thoughts and our actions in our daily lives. Our character is important because it defines who we are as a person, not on the outside, but on the inside, deep within our hearts and our minds. So why is this topic? Why is ethics important? Ethics is important for several reasons. First, it helps us make good decisions about what is right and wrong in any given situation. By examining the consequences of an action and considering the moral principles involved in that action, we as individuals should be able to determine what's the most ethical course of action when a choice is presented to us. Well, these choices, of course, can be big or small, and more importantly, each choice contains some measure of ethics within it. Each choice helps us to make decisions that are in line with our own personal values and principles, as well as the values and principles within our families, within our friendships, within our communities, within our lives. Ethics is also important because it helps to create a sense of trust with people that we interact with. And when we behave ethically, we demonstrate to others that we can be trusted to act in a manner that is consistent with the values and principles of he who is referred to as a good person. Bottom line, ethics is important because when acting ethically, it should mean that we are being a good person. So let's dig a little bit deeper into what a good person is. And I would like to pose a few questions and see if anyone would be happy to jump on and answer those questions. In one sentence, can anyone tell me what a good person is? Feel free to unmute yourself or raise your virtual hand and I'll call on you. This is an important question. It may sound like a simple question, but it's one worthy of discussion. Brother Rich Hansen, what is a good person?
Brother Ron, how did I know that you was going to ask me that?
In one
I think
what is a good
I think a good person is somebody who, you know, follows their moral guideline, is upstanding. I'm a big believer that, you know, you're only as good as your word. I think actions speak louder than that. So somebody who you can learn to trust with not only their word, but their actions follow suit. To me, that's a good person. And, you know, of course, we're all biased. I'm going to say a good person is going to line up with what I deem fit, but that's not always the case.
Good.
So that's my take on it.
Thank you, brother.
You're welcome.
Brother Chad, feel free to speak up. What defines a good person versus a bad person?
Thank you, Worshipful Brother. I think that a good person is someone who does exactly what they ought to do while knowing that there's absolutely no consequence to them if they don't. And perhaps, you know, we've heard this said as someone who does the right thing even when no one is looking. I think that is the measure of a good person. I think a lot of us behave the way that we want to be perceived when the lights are on, and the real measure is when there is no one looking and there are no consequences.
So let's continue that. Are there different levels of what we define as good or good people? And that's a tough question, and it leads to the following question, which is the word good, is that a subjective question or an objective question? I think the answer is it probably is determined based on who we are as a person. So in the end, what is the result or the purpose of being good? Brother Crickard, what would you say to that? What's the purpose and the end result of being good? And no answer is right or wrong.
What is the purpose of being good? So,
The internal purpose.
Oh, the internal purpose of being good is that I guess it's a feeling you have inside. I don't know. It's that you know that you're either sacrificing or doing something for others.
I think you're exactly right. I think it is a feeling. I think the feeling is happiness, is really what it's all about. And that's what life is really all about. So it's interesting, these should be simple questions, but they're very difficult questions to answer in the big picture. What is a good person? Are all actions good? What defines a good person versus a bad person? Are there different levels of good or hierarchies of good? Is the word good subjective or is it objective? And at the end result, what's the purpose of being good? And probably, like you said, David, happiness. So I'm not a philosopher or a professor, but if I was, I'm sure that this could become a very lengthy topic of discussion at any class, and perhaps should be a topic of discussion in Masonic classes within individual lodges. Some common ethical principles include honesty, fairness, respect, responsibility, compassion, etc. These are principles that are often used to guide our moral decision-making and to evaluate the ethical implications of different actions. So on that same topic, what is happiness? So let's assume that the end result of being good is happiness. Well, then what is happiness? Worshipful Brother Tom, could you tell me what happiness is?
I guess it would be a state of just where there's, how would I put it the best way? A feeling of joy, a feeling of relief, comfort, a feeling of achievement. I think you can wrap some of those things around what is happiness.
Do you think ethics plays a role in happiness?
I think it does, because internally, if you know you're doing something wrong, and then you're somewhat of a good person, that's going to make you feel awful or terrible, or, so if you're doing the right things, it gives you a sense of feeling of, you know what, I did the right thing. I have nothing to worry about. And there's a calmness. There's just a feeling.
Yeah. Brother Crickard, what is your response? What is happiness?
So ethics would be your guide rails for happiness. They're guardrails. That's what keeps you on the path. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Worshipful Brother Dan, what do you think happiness is?
How about perfection in its Masonic sense, in the way that we use it in our rituals? And we talk about the perfect ashlar, and we don't mean that that's an ashlar that doesn't have a flaw, but it's whole and complete. And I think as we move through life and work on our individual character in such a manner, and I'm going to take a real quick sidetrack and go back to your question. Are there different levels of being a good man? I think the answer to that's yes. And that's part of what our Masonic journey is moving from different levels of goodness to be better men. And as we achieve that, if we achieve that, we become that perfect ashlar, not without flaw, but whole and complete. And I think if and when we achieve that status, we understand exactly what happiness is.
Yeah, great answer. Brother Chad, go ahead.
Thank you, brother. I just wanted to share something that was shared with me. The Masonic Restoration Foundation had a symposium in Canada some years ago, and this topic was broached at the festive board, and an older African-American gentleman stood up and shared with us something his grandmother explained to him, which is that happiness is extremely ephemeral and fleeting. You can be happy this moment and unhappy the next moment, just like that. But joy is something that no one can take from you. No circumstances can rob you of. And so I would like all of you to at least consider the difference between sort of temporary happiness and joy. And joy is something that you are personally responsible for. If you have joy, and if you don't let anyone unworthy go near it, no one can take it from you.
Well said. Well, there's many different directions and definitions, obviously, but according to the dictionary, happiness is an emotional state. It's a feeling of joy, satisfaction, contentment, and fulfillment. And I would certainly go as far to say that being an ethical person would have a direct effect on a person's happiness in life. I'm sure you all would agree. Which means the more ethical of a person you are, the happier you should be. So that means if we all want to be happy in life, then we need to first understand what it means to be ethical and then how we're supposed to do that. So how do we be ethical? Worship Brother Bizak, how do we be ethical?
Well, I think ethics are the moral principles that govern your behavior. So you have to have the moral principles of honesty, trustworthiness. If that doesn't govern your behavior, what ethics can you have? And it's the same with a good person. Good people think about the welfare of other people. And I think that's the basis of a lot of what we are taught from the lessons in Masonry. We are considering other people before ourselves. So I now forgot your question, Brian.
So how do we do that? How do we become ethical?
I think one of the best ways is hang around people that you respect who are ethical and mimic them to start with and find your own way.
Good answer. Yeah, this is certainly not 100% correct or all-encompassing answer to this question in this presentation, but like you said, to be ethical, we should probably always consider the impact of our action on others and the moral principles and values of what's right and wrong or what's fair and just.
Yeah.
And so to do this, I think requires us to be many things. And to name a few adjectives, I would say at minimum, we need to be honest, sincere, caring, thoughtful, grateful, patient, kind, empathetic, et cetera, always striving to behave in a way that's respectful of other people's thoughts and feelings and perspectives, not just our own. So maybe happiness is trying to make other people happy also, in some case. So if we take a moment to think about the importance of ethics before we take any action, especially when it involves other people, then we can consider the potential consequences of our actions and the moral values involved, which would then lead us to proceeding with the action or withholding of the action for a better time or a better way. So I would say the simplest answer that I could think of in preparing for this presentation was, so how do we be ethical aside from mimicking other people? I think that's a better answer. But I think we simply need to slow down and we need to think before we act and listen to our internal moral compass. I think we have a tendency nowadays to act before we think, and that's a dangerous path. So slowing down is probably one of the ways that we can become more ethical in the pursuit of that journey. So now let's bring Freemasonry back into this discussion. Why do men join Freemasonry? Brother Jerry, why do men join Freemasonry?
I think that men join Freemasonry so that they are part of a group that is committed to one another and to serving one another, not to seeking our own personal satisfaction or gain. And I think that the reason that is effective is that if we all follow the golden rule, then the reciprocity from your brothers who will love, relieve, and serve you, that is the reward for it. But I think even beyond that, the satisfaction that you're doing it, the whole process of going through the initiation with a group of men that have made that kind of pact with one another, it gives you a context where it's safe. I think a lot of people are selfish out of fear that they're worried about their own welfare so much And when you're sharing that burden with brothers who are committed to that, I think that is what I think is the principal reason for being a Mason and the particular reward for being a Mason.
Brother Cricker, do you think that Freemasonry makes all men better who cross through the West Gate?
I'm going to say no, because maybe the person has to want to become better. It's not, Freemasonry just isn't like this magical thing that makes people better. I think it's, I think the person who comes to it has to be seeking to become better.
Exactly right. So that's exactly the right answer. So well, that would mean then that someone, hopefully, who's a Freemason should be ethical before they enter into Freemasonry as well, right? If Freemasonry is meant to make good men better, which is an ethical mission of our fraternity, we should only admit men who are already ethical to begin with, correct? Probably. So I think you're exactly right. It only helps to make good men better if the person is prepared and willing to learn, if that's their objective and goal of joining the fraternity. Freemasonry is a fraternity that's obviously values ethics and expects its members to adhere to a high moral standard. The ethical principles such as honesty, charity, brotherhood, and truth are central to our organization, and they help to create a positive and supportive environment within our lodges for our brothers. Freemasonry should be committed to promoting integrity and moral conduct among our brethren that encourage them to live with high moral values within the fraternity. So yes, I think ethics is an extremely important aspect of Freemasonry. In fact, perhaps the heart of Freemasonry. And it should help to guide our behaviors, improve our conducts, strengthen our characters as men. Any man interested in Freemasonry should hopefully be led by a definite aim for crossing that Masonic threshold or West Gate. He's entering a new life. And unless he is definitely committed with this purpose in him, then this may be nothing more than him joining Freemasonry, similar to driving a boat without a rudder. The Masonic initiate must learn immediately upon his admission into the craft that life is not a race for possessions and pleasures, that life is the true method of happiness, comes from being unselfish with other people, and that is what Freemasonry is all about. The author of the book, Dudley Wright, he says, Freemasonry is a deep, unfathomable mine. For the candidates to fully comprehend the magnificence and utility of Freemasonry, he must become a plodding and diligent student of the hidden mysteries of nature and science within our craft. Freemasonry, he goes on to say, Freemasonry is ever new, and it responds today to the call of human nature and the needs of the heart just as readily as it did centuries ago. Too often, we as humans feel the need to display perception of ourselves to the world that lacks the genuineness of our private lives. Social media being a perfect example of that. Well, Wright goes on to say that until the tenets of the craft are demonstrated in our daily lives, then we are but ritualists only and not real Masons at all. Honorary or passive members instead of honorable and active workers of the world's history. He says our tenets have been a response to the world's needs because Freemasonry stands for the things that are eternal. He says Freemasonry is a great university where men come together on the common ground of mutual esteem, respect, and fraternalism. Therefore, the mere differences of creed and opinion are often forgotten. We clasp hands, we greet each other eye to eye, and our hearts thrill and throb in unison. As the book continues, Dudley Wright makes some very direct statements about the members of our craft. He says that every member of the craft is either an asset or a liability. Every lodge member who is not a real benefit to his fellow man is a liability and not an asset. And if the majority of our members in any lodge answer to that description, then the lodge itself too becomes a drag on the community and it prevents progress. Now think about that for a moment. That stings a little bit. And that's a statement that should either motivate you or upset you as a Freemason. And if it upsets you, then we need to ask ourselves why we feel offended or defensive towards such a blatant statement. So I'm assuming you all would agree that some men make our lodges better and some men probably make our lodges worse, correct? So do you know by name and face all of the men in your lodges? I'm assuming not. And now, is that because you don't attend regularly, or is it because they don't attend regularly? And perhaps if your lodge's attendance has faded, then we need to ask yourselves why. Has the quality of the men in our lodges been watered down because the West Gate has been weakened? These are all important questions. Questions that every brother should ask within their own lodges, within the officers of their lodges. So Dudley Wright continues, he says, if the lessons of Freemasonry are not being used, then Freemasonry is being wasted, and the liabilities within are increasing at a rapid rate. Strength or weaknesses, solvency or bankruptcy will be the fate of Freemasonry. Now, keep in mind, brothers and friends, that this book was written in 1924, almost 100 years ago. And clearly the problems that face our craft today were unfavorable even over almost 100 years ago, which begs the question, how will Freemasonry fare in the near future? So despite directly pointing the finger at the primary problem of Freemasonry, its members, Wright doesn't harp on this for the sake of creating drama or guilt to the Masonic reader about the fraternity, but rather the contrary. Wright remains extremely positive throughout this book. He reminds us that we are all ambassadors of our craft. He says, if every member of the craft would simply regard himself as an ambassador or apostle and live according to the terms and the fraternalism of within our craft and the tools of our craft, then the slurs and the aspersions against the institution would fade away entirely if we were only all acting as ambassadors. So he goes on to say, there's an entire chapter about this. He says that what we need are Masonic apostles or Masonic leaders and ambassadors. He says Masonry is more than ever regarded as a field for service, a field in which all must be workers, in which there are no aristocrats. Freemasonry is not a social club, but it's a sphere for social endeavor combined with training towards the perfection, Worshipful Brother Dan, of the individual. The lodge is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. Real Masonic work begins when the lodge is over. Just as the sermon should begin when the preacher has finished his discourse, the lodge is the preparation school to how we act in the real world as men. The strength of Freemasonry, it's not in the numbers of the men in our lodge, but it's to the extent in which its tenets are put into practice, and it's up to us to put these tenets into practice. Our strength and success is similar to the depth and strength of the root of a tree. The deeper and stronger the root of a tree, the more sturdy and beautiful will be the tree. Wright goes on to say there is a grave danger in the counting of heads in our fraternity. He says in what should be counted is the counting of men's souls. It's a pretty deep statement. So, brothers, in closing and opening up for further discussion, as Freemasons, we should constantly ask ourselves, what have I done for Freemasonry? The strength and greatness of Freemasonry lays within our own personal ethics, our service to others, and the simple practicing of our tenets. How easy is that? So my final question to you, brothers and friends, is this. Have the tenets of Freemasonry been exemplified in you, or have you been living a lie? Many are intent with the mere gaining of the rights and privileges of membership. The most seem to care less whether or not they make it to lodge or acquaint themselves with the knowledge of the simple knowledge of the degrees, simply the knowledge of the 3 degrees. These are ignorances, seemingly futile, yet these ignorances, like this one, is one of the core dangers which threatens our fraternity. A thorough knowledge of history, philosophy, and science of Freemasonry ought to be the ambition of every member of our craft. And when he has studied and is well versed in these subjects, he can answer truthfully the question of what came you here to do? One of the first questions that all Masons were asked when being initiated into Freemasonry, and we open and close our lodges on the entered apprentice degree, is, where did you first become a Mason? Brother Rich, what's the answer to that?
In my heart.
In my heart. Exactly right. So Wright's book, The Ethics of Freemasonry, does a superb job of reminding the reader of the natural and unbreakable connection between ethics and Freemasonry. A connection that is so obvious, a Mason could easily argue that ethics is a characteristic planted in all our hearts when we are born, if we wish to become Freemasons. Brothers, that is all. I'd be happy to open it up for further discussion on this topic.
Brother Brian, I'll jump in if you got a moment.
Go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, you know, just a wonderful presentation. I think Brother Dudley Wright was, you know, in that era that he was in, was stating the facts that we've stated way before that, and even up until this last year. You know, I think that's a continual statement that we have to have good ethical behaviors. We have to apply, you know, Freemasonry and the things that preceded it, like the mystery schools, were schools. And, you know, we have to be able to teach. I think first we have to know what the tenets are, which you think we would, but a lot of people don't. And then we have to be able to teach those to others, and then they have to be applicable. You know, they have to apply these to everybody's, you know, into each individual's life. And I think that's where we see a mishap in so many lodges. I mean, you guys can relate, I'm sure. So many lodges don't teach anything. You know, we've got the fraternalism down.
Mm-hmm.
We've got all the aspects that come along with fraternalism pretty good shape. But when it comes to the education or the learning of the deeper mysteries, we fail miserably. And all of our, you know, most profound thinkers and writers have stated this over just multiple generations, but only a select few seem to ever take up that torch. So it is the Masonic, you know, prophets, so to speak, or the educators, or however you want to label those things. You know, it's those guys, the torch bearers, that do have to continue this mission. Now, I think we're smart enough to know that not every man will have the ears to hear that, but those who do are the ones who gather together like they are tonight. And that's, you know, we taught on John and Dan and myself, we taught on this. Robert Davis just gave a speech on this. It will condense and it will consolidate into that core group of men. Where that number is, who knows? But I think eventually, you know, I had to come to terms with a few things too, that, you know, talking about ethics and is it subjective? I think, you know, what's peace for the spiders, chaos for the fly. Those who like fraternalism just like to come and see their brothers. I think, you know what, they may be there. They may be there for the long haul. Will it give men like us what we desire in lodge? Probably not. So that's why we have to be able to be able to gather together and share what we desire and come to the table for our needs. And that's just where I've seen Freemasonry go, and even for the future. I think that's how it's going to be. So I appreciate your time. It was a very good message.
No, thank you, brother. So why are people unethical? Where does that come from?
Well, you know, being a psychologist, I think, you know, there's many factors. I can sit here and play the devil's advocate and say that members of the New York mob are very ethical in their standard of ethics. Now, there's a reason, you know, when we come to the doors of Freemasonry that we have to profess our belief in God and our moral standards, because that is the ethics. Just as our brother said earlier, that's our guardrails. That's where we are playing ball in between those lines. And ethically, if we get to make up our own, we can call that what it will. So there's so many factors there to be able to answer. I could go down to genetics. I could go down to evolution. I can go down to the way children were raised, who they were raised by.
Mhm.
Ethics is a very wide topic. And once again, I mean, you could take a serial killer and he thinks he's living by the code of ethics that he was raised by, and he thinks it's perfectly fine because he doesn't have the capacity mentally to have any empathy or compassion due to antisocial personality. He thinks what he is doing is correct. And that's all debatable, it's all debatable, but that's what the books would tell you. So as far as ethics, it's super subjective. That's why I think it's most important that we have, or we remain and live in a state who has what we deem good ethical guidelines for what we desire.
Mhm.
Because ethics can be spun into anything we want. It's
Rich, go
only
ahead.
our definition. It's only our definition.
Give your brief history, your career on this topic or in general.
Okay. Yeah, me and my wife, we own a mental health company, and we do a lot of counseling for the school district in the county that I live in. We've worked in mental health for probably 20 years now, and I've seen what I deem as super ethical people that I look up to. Some of them, everybody on this board that I know personally, but then I've ran into some that are. I've got a neighbor on one side who shot and killed a man in the house next to me, and my other neighbor molested his 2 daughters, and ethically they don't line up with my values.
Yeah.
So I see it all here.
No, appreciate that. Thank you, brother.
Absolutely.
I think ethics is, and Chad, I've got you, and then David next. I think ethics, if you think about it, how do we simplify this? Because it can go down such a rabbit hole. Ethics is like a bridge from one person to another, and that bridge always requires patching and fixing. So no one is just always ethical. It's a constant practice, and that's what Freemasonry does and allows for us, is to constantly practice these tools. And I would also go so far as to say that ethics is extremely fragile, that you could make one mistake and your ethics could be destroyed forever. Ethics being your character as well. So this is extremely important topic. Brother Chad, go ahead. David, and then Worshipful Brother Dan, I'm gonna grab you.
Thank you, brother. I just wanted to comment that I believe that ethics requires a certain amount of intellect and information or education. I think that a foolish, ignorant person believes that taking for themselves is of a greater benefit to themselves. And a lot of ethics talks about doing for others and helping others and being available to assist others. And someone who understands fully realizes that you will gain as an individual far more serving others than you would ever be being selfish. But an ignorant person can't wrap their head around unselfishness as personal benefit. And so I think there needs to be an element of education. I also think there needs to be an element of personal prosperity. I think literally a starving person, someone who's genuinely starving, often cannot afford ethics. I think there's a lot of things that people do when they're desperate, and I mean in very desperate situations, that are unethical. And so Freemasonry, like we talk about guarding the West Gate, it's not for everyone. It's for someone that's already got a lot of their ducks in a row, that when we have a conversation about ethics, it's a two-way conversation. Someone in a very desperate situation isn't really able to be receptive to such a topic. And so I think we should all be very fortunate that we're able to even have this conversation tonight. The fact that we're all prosperous enough to have the luxury of ethical behavior.
Mhm. Yeah, good point. And it just goes to show how important it is, our actions in the outside world. An unethical person could see our actions, and it might be the seed that helps them discover true ethics. So everything we do has a ripple effect with that. Brother David, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Thank you. So you asked the question, like, are there unethical, what is an unethical person? Or, so, and a lot of things can cause someone to be unethical. And, like Brother Rich was saying, the way you're raised, the people you're around. But I just, I'm just going to throw this out there as always, but we got to remember that Satan is real, and that is why people at the base are unethical. They have so yeah, that's, I just want to throw that out there. I really believe that the devil is at work, and they say there's battles going on around us that we don't even see, and the devil he's after us, he's after everybody, and we just got to stand strong, and like you said, be a shining light for somebody who might be struggling. That's all I want to say.
David, is it harder to be ethical, or is it harder to be unethical?
It is harder to be ethical. The discipline it takes. Discipline is hard in the moment, and I equate being an ethical person as being a disciplined person. So to me, it is hard, because being unethical is, it's more of an easy road, an easy out to get. I can't come up with an example, but let's say it's easy to, when you're a kid, it's easier to steal a candy bar from a convenience store than to, go mow somebody's grass and earn some money to go buy that candy bar.
Sure.
So.
Thank you. Worship Brother Dan.
I'd like to go back to Brother Jeriel's remarks a moment ago, and he mentioned the golden rule. Yeah, and I think it's safe to say that every culture on earth has some version of the golden rule embedded in it. I know in some of the Eastern religions, it's phrased in the reverse of what we have, and it's something to the effect of, don't do to someone what you would not like to have for them to do to you. Mm-hmm. It's the same idea. So I have something of a rhetorical question, and that is not the basis of ethics the golden rule? I mean, that seems to be the universal standard of where we start when we begin to talk about ethics, of doing to other people what we wish they would do for us or to us. Mm-hmm. As Masons, when we come into Masonry, we focus a lot on that dialogue between the master and the senior warden in the entered apprentice degree, and that master asks the question, "What did you come to Masonry to do?" And we seize on that to learn. But the second part of that is to subdue my passions. Mm-hmm. So what is it that's in conflict with the golden rule? Isn't it man's passion that conflicts with the golden rule? Why do you not do to someone else what you would desire that they do to you? It's because there's a passion out there that conflicts with that. It can be summarized in two words: I want. When your desires become so great that you're willing to do to other people something that you really would hope that they wouldn't do to you, and I think life's out of balance at that particular point, and there's a breach of ethics at that particular point. So I guess the point that I'm probably not doing a very good job trying to make is that as Freemasons, we've addressed that very issue of how to stay within an ethical bounds, and that is by learning to control ourselves, subdue our passions, and to behave in an ethical manner, which leads us, I think, back to that exercise of the golden rule. simply doing to others as you would have them do to you. I think that may be the foundation of all ethics. I'd be happy to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a great comment. No, it made perfect sense. I think it just continues the fact that it's a difficult question to answer, but it should be a simple question to answer. Do unto others as you would have others do unto you. I think life throws a tremendous amount of curveballs that challenges that seemingly obvious response on a minute by minute basis. And it's our job to continue to practice Freemasonry, to stay focused on how to do that and to implement that. Worshipful Brother Bizak, what are your thoughts?
Well, I want to go back to the topic that you brought up earlier of happiness and the relationship between four particular philosophers who were in the rationalist period of the early 1700s, mid 1700s. There was a guy named George Cheyenne. He said that temperance and virtue is the route to happiness. As rationalist philosophy evolved, there was another person who came along, Emile Chatelet, I believe his name was, who said that the most rewarding passion was that of study. And then there was another German philosopher, I believe his name was Justy, and he said to be happy, a man must overcome his passions. Then we have to get into a debate about passions being our sufferings, our vices, which men are supposed to have somewhat under control before they even come to Masonry. But if not, at that point, learn to get them under control. But Immanuel Kant, he's the one who said that his philosophy was to be happy, you had to exercise reason. And that takes us all the way back into Masonry and the early philosophies, that we ask a man to cultivate his knowledge and have the capacity to use the knowledge he cultivates. And that's supposed to equal somewhere down the road wisdom. And it's the use of the knowledge that he gains in achieving wisdom that leads to happiness. And of course, just as Dan said, that happiness or that wisdom that leads us to happiness takes us into the other areas of ethics. And as Dan said, behaving ourselves, finding ways to control those things inside of us that do not correspond with what Jerry brought up, the golden rule, and the welfare of other people being at the forefront of our thinking. And how do you go wrong by having the welfare of other people in the forefront of your behavior and your thinking? And I believe that's the essence of what Freemasonry is teaching, or supposed to teach, is learn to control your behavior and thoughtfulness of other people first.
Yeah, well said. Great point. I'd like to call on someone here that I've not seen before, if you don't mind. Brother Colin Buchanan. Are you joining us from across the pond today?
Yes, I am, Brian, from Hamilton, Scotland, just southwest of Glasgow.
Well, first, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your day to join and be with us here tonight. Would love to hear your comments and thoughts on this presentation and topic tonight.
Okay, just to give you a bit of background, I'm just recently been raised in May of this year, so relatively inexperienced at Freemasonry. But I think, generally speaking, what defines a good person, in the wider society is honesty in your relationships with your family, your workplace, your work colleagues, with yourself, to be perfectly honest, and with your God, whatever that God may be. And I think it helps, obviously, if you're not consumed with your own self, shining light on others whenever you can, being genuinely interested in others helps, and praise whatever you can is massive. That certainly defines a good person, I believe. And being polite, well-mannered. So all the things, that I've been brought up, the morals and ethics, that which varies widely, around the world and locally in all areas. For instance, somebody brought up in a farm would have a completely different upbringing to somebody that was in a deprived inner city.
Mhm.
So the environmental factors where people are brought up affects their ethics. And in terms of what brings people to Freemasonry, just having joined the fraternity, it's, for myself, it was just an extension of the ethics that I already believe in, and would look to better them even further than myself. The old saying, make good men better, and being willing to learn is a massive thing, and that's something that I'm looking forward to getting involved more with Freemasonry.
Brother, thank you. Question, how did you see, so you were recently raised, correct?
Yes,
And when did you first become an entered apprentice? How long ago?
February this year.
February of this year. Okay.
Yes.
What does your lodge education program look like? And I'm more curious than anything because obviously your location versus ours, American Freemasonry tends to have some slightly different practices. What does your education look like? Does the lodge provide that? What's the process?
It's really through the brothers, taking you under your wing, helping you, finding out where you need help, and encouraging you.
That's great. Well, we appreciate you being with us here tonight and sharing your comments very much. Thank you. Hopefully we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Brother Brian, can I add another point here?
Yes, go ahead.
And I think that this is especially important in our actions within our lodges. Maintaining a positive attitude is essential, and also encouraging one another. So often we're ready to criticize when somebody goofs up, and so seldom are we prone to compliment somebody when we see them doing something good. And I think that a practice that I try to do as often as possible is noticing, especially for young men who are really comprehending Freemasonry, when we see them doing something that is showing their progress, we should make that point to them. We're taught, particularly in our charges after our degrees, about the polite way we're supposed to be going about criticizing one another. But there's a corollary to that, and that is praising one another for what we do well. And another corollary to that is a kind of a watchword of mine, which is that credit shared is multiplied, not divided. And whenever you yourself are being lauded for doing something well, for making some achievement, for being elected to an office, whatever, one of the best things that you can do on those occasions is trying to point out the other people who have helped you, the shoulders that you're standing on every time you make progress in your own the growth of your own ethics, to share that credit. And that, as I say, that multiplies rather than divides the credit. So many people are motivated when they do things that are good. They only want to do it for what the reward is or the recognition is, and that that pales in comparison with sharing your gratitude for the other brothers who have helped you to be as good a brother as you can be.
Well said. Thank you, Jerry. Brother Mark St. Cyr, you had a good comment, and if you're able to share that comment out loud, that would be terrific. Brother Mark, are you able to share that? Okay, he just messaged, says, sorry, this has no mic. So he basically says, I'm sure you can all read it. It's it may be legal, but is it ethical is another question. So just another challenge in our thought process to differentiate what is ethical, what we should or should not do. And that's a good point, especially in business, which I think, why there was that class I took in college, business ethics, because you deal with a lot of unethical situations or the possibility of in business. So it's about trying to do the right thing. Are there any other comments on this topic of any kind?
Worshipful Brother Brian,
Yes.
take you back to one other area that you mentioned. Wright wrote in his book that we need, or that Masonry needs ambassadors or apostles, and you touched on that very briefly. And while I certainly don't disagree with that particular point, I think I might refine it just a little bit, and that is we need effective ambassadors or apostles, because I would suggest to you that all of us, and I mean that in the most inclusive sense, all of us who are Freemasons are ambassadors for Freemasonry, for good or for ill. Last month, in the presentation that I gave, I'll remind you that of the surveys of men who responded to the Voices of Freemasonry for William O. Ware, about 75 or 80% of those guys said, I came to Freemasonry because of a relative or because of a friend. So we are ambassadors. We are the walking billboards for Freemasonry. I think it may be telling to some degree that maybe our behavior isn't so attractive that it automatically leads men into our lodges and into Freemasonry. But I would I guess my point again that I'm rambling and trying to make is that we are ambassadors, for better or worse. We are ambassadors for Freemasonry. And I think it would be a good idea if that was more a part of our consciousness on an ongoing basis, so that we would be aware that men watch us, and they will either be attracted to Freemasonry or repelled by Freemasonry on the basis of our actions.
Great comment. Could not agree more. Thank you.
Brother Brian, can I add to that real quick?
Please.
Just a quick thought that came to mind when Brother Dan was saying that. I think it would almost be a better question to ask, instead of, why do men join? And the better question we might need to contemplate on is, why do men stay? Because so many don't. Why do the ones stay that do? What do they see that the others don't? What was the catalyst? Was it a connection, a mentor, a relationship? There's so many things to contemplate on there. But I see men who stay. And that's always been perplexing to me. Why do some men go and some men stay? I've even written a little on that in the past. I just wanted to throw that in there because, what Brother Dan said is correct. Usually is, family member or some connection like that. And we are walking billboards. But what about the ones who weren't? I didn't have any of that. It was the connections that I made. And it was the men that I seen that I respected that kept me. If not, I probably would have walked away, which in turn led me to learn the tenets of Freemasonry, how it could be applied to my life and better me. Mm-hmm. And that has been one of the best moves for me. So I appreciate you letting me speak again.
No, absolutely. Great comment. Thank you. Any other comments or thoughts, confessions at any time?
I have one other contribution to make, Brother Brian. talk that I've been given lately is on guarding the West Gate, and I think that one of the points that is the strongest and that I get the most reactions for is reminding brothers that when you sign a man's petition to join your lodge, you should be making a commitment to mentor that man as he's going through Masonry. The more we mentor one another, the more we promote this fellowship that we have and this caring for others. Just signing a petition so that you can say, "Oh, I signed all these petitions." That's meaningless. What's meaningful is that if you're telling your lodge, "I vouch for this man," you should follow that up by mentoring that man, and that kind of thing gets passed on from generation to generation in our lodges, and I think this is a major sustaining principle.
Yep, 100% agree. Thank you, Gerald. Brother Rich, Brother Mark mentioned in comments, he says, "I believe that men stay here are the ones that truly see both the genius and the importance of the craft and decide it's worth fighting for."
I agree. And those are the ones that that's the guys I want to hang around.
Yeah.
Those are the ethics that I align to. So that's my boundaries that I want to be a part of.
Yeah. Great comment, Mark. Brethren, anything else on this topic before we move along? Well, I appreciate you taking your time very much to join us here tonight for this presentation during the holidays. I know it's challenging, but we appreciate it and are grateful for each and every one of you for taking that time. Worship Brother Bizek, would you please give just a brief introduction of who our speaker will be next month?
Certainly. Terry Tilton is past Grand Master of Minnesota, as the screen says. He's also an active Methodist minister, and he's the longtime secretary of the Philalethes Society. And Terry has graciously offered to present this paper that he has submitted to the Fraternity Lodge of Research, and it'll be in a more abbreviated form, but I think you'll find the perspective of religion and Freemasonry from a practicing theologian and successful and longtime Mason to be an evening you won't want to miss for that discussion.
Good. Look forward to it. So this will be one of the times where we will openly discuss religion within our bounds. Thank you. On that same topic, while I have you, would you please highlight the Philalethes Society just a little bit more?
Sure. Philalethes Society, brothers, was founded in 1928, and it's an international Masonic Research Society, and it's the oldest independent Masonic Research Society in North America. It was started to serve the needs of those seeking deeper insight into the history, rituals, and symbols of the craft, as well as spreading light, of course, to others. And today it publishes the Journal of Masonic Research in Letters. And to learn more about Philalethes, I'll post a link in the chat box as soon as I'm finished here. And if you have questions, please feel free to get in touch with me. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you. And that link that he will be posting is the same link that you see on your slide, Rubicon Masonic Society /Philalethes, I believe. Worship Brother Dan, would you give maybe a brief update on transactions that are upcoming?
Worshipful Brother Brian, our transactions are with our editor for final edits at this point. There is one contribution that we're waiting on, and that is our forward. And once we have that, we anticipate having a published set of the transactions of the Rubicon Masonic Society, 33 separate articles ready to be released early in 2023.
Great.
How can we subscribe to that, brother?
I can assure you that we will let everyone know as soon as they're available, for sure. Thank you. And Dan, it being the collector of all the money. Just kidding. Brothers, not to beat on this too much, but if you haven't seen the documentary yet, we strongly recommend it. The Masonic Table was our first documentary from the Rubicon Masonic Society. It's a very interesting documentary about dining in Freemasonry. So hope you get a chance to check that out. Of course, Rubicon Masonic Society is a nonprofit organization, and we're always looking for support of any kind. And some of the best support is just the sharing and spreading the good word about our fraternity, so we can have new faces come and join us. Worship Brother Dan, would you please deliver our closing devotion?
I will. And brothers, our closing devotion again will be a benediction from the McBride ritual. So please assume an attitude of prayer. May the blessings of the great architect of the universe follow our labors and rest upon this and all regular Masonic assemblies throughout the globe. Amen. And so mote it be.
So mote it be.
Mote it be.
So mote it be.
Brothers, our next presentation is January 23rd, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, the fourth Monday of every month. If you know of anybody that might like to attend, please ask them to go to rubiconmasonicsociety.com/RSVP. Until next time, brothers, Merry Christmas. May we always be happy to meet, sorry to part, and happy to meet again. It's great to see you all. We'll talk to you soon.